School research done. I'd like to do a special thanks to the DPAC Facilities Committee. So the DPAC Facilities Committee, we got a few members here. The ones I remember are Robin, Scott, Joel, Sean. Thank you. If I missed anybody who's on this call, please accept my thanks. A tremendous amount of learning, tremendous amount of volunteer hours have gone into this. And of course, the DPAC executive, lots and lots of help from every single member. A special shout out to Amanda, who answers some of my 2 a.m. questions. So I'm always flabbergasted when someone answers at 2 a.m. and she does. So incredibly committed group of parents who are passionate about our facilities and passionate in also a sense that they're not passionate about their school. We're actually passionate about the entire district. We want to do better for all our kids, not only our kids, but the generations of kids that will come. So we're always open. So DPAC Facilities Committee is open to any VSB parent. Contact me if you want to join. So we're going to start off with what is a long-range facilities plan? And what is it? And here, the definition here, all these quotes are from the ministry guidelines. So the ministry issued new guidelines quite recently. So last year they issued new guidelines that say, here is what your long-range facilities plan should have in it. It should be wide-ranging and provide a vision. It should be 10 years at minimum. It should involve a comparison of where we're at today with a variety of possible future scenarios. It should involve alternatives that challenge the status quo. School districts should consult their local government. And in Vancouver, that's a very, very big one because we have a lot of density in certain areas of the city. And then public consultation is a key element. And part of the consultation here is it must include consultation with First Nations. And then something interesting that's new is student enrollment. So how we have our student enrollment and our forecast can be done by geography or by zone. So that's kind of really critical for Vancouver, and we'll get into why. Another big one that's new is individual districts can calculate their own operating capacity. So that's kind of new, and we'll get into that one and why that one's important. So that's kind of the definition of a long-range facilities plan from the ministry. So this is not our definition. This is just the Coles notes of a 7-page document that goes through what the ministry expects each school district in their long-range facilities plan. So this is a Coles notes version of their guidelines. And then now let's talk about where are we at today with a long-range facilities plan. So last year, we worked on a long-range facilities plan. And by we, I mean the Vancouver School Board. So the Vancouver School Board worked on a long-range facilities plan and it didn't get approved. So it got into a mode where it got into 17 recommendations to do more due diligence, and then it was called a draft long-range facilities plan. And one of the recommendations was a year-long envisioning consultation process with communities and neighborhoods. So that's kind of important. And we got some consultation. So first we had just one piece, and that's what they call the phase 1 survey. So a survey was done, about 1,700 parents, 2,000 parents, responded back to it, and it was kind of generic. So lots of interpretation can be done on a survey like that when it's kind of generic and broad. So not a lot of detail in terms of a survey. It's not qualitative, it's more quantitative. Okay, we got a bunch of feedback, check. But what does it mean? So what are the issues? So someone explained to me what the issues are. And the survey basically said, the issue is we have a lot of old infrastructure and we need to update it and we need to build modern facilities. So yeah, everyone agrees with that. So that's kind of one direction the survey went in on. So that's the kind of feedback consultation that's taken place so far. And now we got a fairly aggressive roadmap to finish a long-range facilities plan. The only way that that can be done on this aggressive roadmap is if we use the old long-range facilities plans, the old long-range guidelines. So if we're going to proceed down this aggressive path and this urgency path to arrive at a long-range facilities plan, it's going to be an update to last year's plan. It's not going to be a new one based on the new guidelines by the ministry. So the answer will be, well, it's a living document. We will update it as we need to, and it will, evolve, and no problem. But there's a big danger there. And the danger there is the ground rules are built on the old guidelines. So we need to think about that, and we need to challenge that. So the VSB's interpretation of the ministry guidelines here is very important. So they had two and this is a chart. This chart here is prepared by the Vancouver School Board. So the senior staff have prepared this chart, and they have 2017 requirements, 2019 requirements. So comparing the old versus new. And then they have a note column. So here, there is a big question out there in terms of what is going to be in our long-range facilities plan that will present a variety of options, that will be wide-ranging, that will present future scenarios and pathways that we can choose, and that will challenge the status quo. So this is where I would like to break it up and just do a stop sharing for a moment and then open it up for 10 minutes of discussion, because there's quite a bit of content here, but my intent is to make these kind of pauses so that we have some discussion. So if somebody would like to give us any insights into what they just heard, please raise your hand, and Gord, if you can, or Amanda, if you guys can help me coordinate any speakers.
Okay, we're looking for hands. We're looking for hands raised. Or if you're all shy and somebody wants to jump in, you can also unmute yourself, because I don't see any hands raised right now. And if nobody raises their hands in 10 seconds, perfect. I was exactly going to ask Sean to say a few words. I know he feels this is something that he feels really passionate about, and he's raised his hand. So why don't we start with Sean?
Thanks for starting that off, Vic. I like the way that you have presented some of those initial guide rails that we want to be talking about here. I think the key place to start is that notion of a vision. And in particular, I'll say, based on my experience, I don't see one yet. And in particular, what I don't see is one coming from the board, from the trustees. From what I can tell, other than some recommendations that were added, there was no core of foundational input actually provided into what the document should be. And it doesn't seem like we're going to get that. I'm just wondering, in the 3 months that I've stepped away from DPAC, has that changed?
It's a very good question. There is a meeting that's going to be happening this Monday, which is a board meeting. And at the board meeting, they will either approve the timeline or that's their opportunity to say, hold on a minute, a timeline is too aggressive. We need to take a step back and we need to look at a few key elements. And we'll talk about those key elements in the future, so I won't give everything away. But you're absolutely right. Values and vision are big, giant parts of that puzzle.
Yeah, I think we're way too early in this process to be going to any kind of a product because we haven't had input yet from the board. Like we haven't had those foundational statements made. We've seen the ministry guidelines, at least the old ones, with some status quo parallels drawn to the new ones. But in 2016, we went through this process. The board went through great pains to actually provide local context that was going to actually inform the document from the ground up. And we just haven't seen that here. And we really need that from the board.
Absolutely. There is, maybe there's an element of shyness here, but there's nothing wrong with contacting the ministry and asking them, we need to get some clarification on these guidelines. What can we do? Can you help us? Can you send your planner over here and help us? So there's nothing wrong with the trustees having even a workshop with the ministry. So I think there's, we definitely need to reach out more and have more of conversation around what the trustees can do in terms of setting that direction.
Trustees can do anything they want to do in terms of providing that direction. That's their mandated job on the board. It's part of the board policy manual. They provide that high level guidance and direction, and we just haven't seen it yet.
One thing I would provide, sorry, just to have a sec, Vic, for all our attendees, one thing I provide for context, one of the reasons we scheduled this presentation by Vic at this point in the year was because, as we've said, or as we are supposed to have a year-long extensive consultation with the public about facilities, about the long-range facilities plan. And so if there's a consultation piece that's happening in the near future, and we believe, and according to the board agendas, there's supposed to be a second piece to accompany the consultation the survey that was done earlier in the year. We're here, this presentation is to partly refresh everybody's memory about what this issue is, why it's important, and just provide some information so that if we are consulted, we understand what's going on. Thank you, thank you, Vic. And I have three other speakers, Solomon and then Mark.
Yeah, one of the comments I would have, especially when we look at the language, and Vic, thanks for doing a table to compare or put that up in terms of the last slide you had. But one of the chronic issues is looking out 10 years, the relationship between what is being developed in terms of the City of Vancouver's development and rezoning applications. And something that we've all seen being quite challenging, that suddenly all these folks who are in Olympic Village have lots of kids, and the pressure points that you see from affordability to other kinds of living arrangements as folks are having kids where I guess people are surprised that people are living in smaller places. So certainly around Nightingale, what we're facing is a tremendous amount of densification along Kingsway, Broadway, Main, and a lot of affordability in terms of new rentals are coming in. So I think the quality of that forecasting neighborhood by neighborhood, I think that's maybe a key input to be able to ensure that the linkage between the City of Vancouver and VSB is stronger in terms of how do you actually deal with the site-by-site forecasting. Thanks.
Absolutely. And we'll talk about that, Solomon. That's great feedback. Mark?
Yeah, so just really appreciate the framing that you provided giving this presentation. So as I mentioned, so my two kids go to Trudeau and then Cavell. And at Edith Cavell, Cavell is near the Canby corridor. and has had wait lists and a lottery for some years now, because there are a lot of families, and as Solomon just said, a lot of people having kids, and the wait lists are it's just more and more kids every year that are getting through a lottery and then sent to another catchment. And then it was announced that Cavell gets a seismic upgrade, which kind of surprised us, because we were going, well, we're second or third for an expanded school, so why would you seismically upgrade a school when you're going to expand it? And the first answer was, well, that's a separate office and we don't coordinate with that office. But the second answer, in no small words from the ministry, was, with empty seats in the system, there's just no way, like, this is just not a priority. And we got some very strong language letters in all our advocacy straight from the ministry that just with the number of seats that are empty in Vancouver, they wouldn't do it. And then, as Vic, you just outlined, we got this letter and this change to long-range facilities planning from the ministry that said that old policy is out the window now. This is great. You can do all these new things that Vic, you just went through in that bolded quote. So we got so excited. It was like, oh my gosh, they're now giving districts the plan or the authority to do it completely differently, to get, not approach planning and long-range planning in the old way that's led places like Edith Cavell, which has a higher density, just not a priority, and just never going to have an expand. So we were very excited. And then this announcement that, we're just following the old plan. So the perception we got was like the ministry saying, hey, completely new approach. We recognize the old system didn't working and we're just doubling down on the old method. So that was very much the feeling at Cavell, that the ministry unleashed these new possibilities and they're just not being taken advantage of. So that's very much the feeling at Cavell. So just really like this reinforcement that the ministry guidelines that you just went through are a completely different approach to planning, and we're just not taking advantage of them. So the trustees and everybody, please just take advantage of these amazing new guidelines. Well, which could be amazing. They're kind of vague, so who knows? I think they could be amazing. I'll stop there.
Mark, completely concur with you. The Cavell is going to come up as an example on towards the end of this presentation, because it's just one of those that doesn't make any sense. But you're absolutely right. The long-range facilities plan is a visioning document. It is to describe what do we want to see, not in 10 years, what do we want to see in the next generations. So you have to paint that long-range picture. And 10 years is not long range. We know that. So definitely 100%. Robin, and then I think we should move on to the presentation. So go ahead, Robin.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that the facilities plan causes a lot of trouble in different ways for different parts of Vancouver schools. You've got some groups that where schools are overcrowded and people can't get their children into schools, and that's really important. And then you have other schools where, for various reasons, their attendance is low, and Queen Alexandra is an example of that. Very old school that has a low attendance. Only 1/3 of people in the catchment choose to send their child to our school. And in many ways, that's a product of decisions that are made at the district level. So for instance, in capacity utilization, where there's a high special needs population, the needs of that population aren't taken into account for space calculations. And with multiple threats of district closure, parents don't want to send their kids there anymore. So it becomes almost like a foregone conclusion. And really frustrating for us. We have this situation where it's not just about capital decisions, it's about teacher allocation. We had enough students from out of catchment who wanted to attend school this year to have 2 kindergarten classes. And by some combination of district policy, all the out of catchment students were discouraged from coming. So we ended up with one K class. So we're in this strange situation where 2/3 of students are allowed to flee to other catchment areas from our school, our catchment area, but nobody's allowed to come in. And it really makes us feel like there's some sort of predetermined conclusion in the capital planning process that's trying to starve our school of students to create the final outcome of school closure. And at the same time, when we see no shift in the LRFP, and that adds to those concerns, and especially the fact that we're not finding a way to use equity to calculate school capacity, where we're not trying to do enrollment projections based on big changes in local planning context. It really feels like there's and a lack of transparent information about how some of these decisions are being made and where the data is. So it really feels like we're getting beaten up on within this context within the district. And at the same time, I feel a lot of pain for other folks who are hearing this argument of there's empty seats over there on the east side, so we're not going to give you a new school. So we somehow need to find a way to stop that narrative in its tracks, because if we end up just pitting east versus west or school versus school, I think we're all going to pay for it. And we need to find a way that we can put options back on the table. That's the thing that struck me the most from your presentation so far, Vic, is that the new guidelines call for options and studying a variety of scenarios, and all we're hearing is the same old solution without any room for creativity. And there's a lot of opportunities for creativity here.
Absolutely. And you know, the options and the creativity is what we should be discussing. In the long range facilities plan, there should be 3 options for, you know, the long range. And we don't need to decide on one of those options today. It's a variety of scenarios that could happen. And then we can discuss it, but we can discuss it then openly. And then we can solve this high growth, no growth problem around our city and take the time to do it right. But we need to have that foundation. But what's happening today in schools like Queen Alexandria is not right, because there's also a transparency issue there. And what, you know, a dream of mine would be a leaderboard, you know, like, you know, almost like an airline count, you know, registration, you know, like here are how many seats are available in each spot. So each grade, you know, 22 seats total, 18 are taken, so 4 are left. You know, transparency like that, every school, every grade, understanding how enrollment management works to make that transparent would be critical. It'd be great to see. That's another little bucket of mine where I do believe that enrollment management, when it's done so that you're purposely trying to reduce a student population at a certain school, is not right. Make it open at least and tell us what you're trying to do, and we're adults here, right? So I think those are the bigger things that we need to address in terms of transparency, and the long range facility plan is a way to do that. I'm going to go back to the presentation. I might have to start. Oh, it picked up where I left off. Perfect.
Vic, I'm sorry. Can you answer the question in the chat about the Indigenous? Somebody asked a question about Indigenous involvement.
Sure. You know, I'm not monitoring the chat at all, so I did not see that question. I don't even know what that question is. So I apologize, but what we'll have to do is I planned this presentation so that we got about hopefully, you know, 20 minutes to 25 minutes at the end of it for the general discussion. And I would love for one of my colleagues to go through the chat and then to point out questions that we should be answering right at the end of the presentation. So if that's okay, Adrian, we can go
Thank
that
you.
way.
So sorry about that.
No problem. I just, there's too much going on. It'd be hard to monitor the chat while I'm presenting here. Thank you. And here's how complicated this is. There are so many pieces. And this is another reason why the long range facilities plan is vitally important, is because there are so many pieces and they don't actually fit together. So we got the long range facilities plan. That's the responsibility of the Vancouver School Board. Then we got something new that doesn't exist in a lot of places, but it brand new in Vancouver, and that's called the Land and Asset Strategy. And then we got catchments and choice programs. And then we have a seismic project office. The official name is Vancouver Project Office, but I like to call it the seismic project office because then we know exactly what this is about. It's to make seismic things happen. So that's kind of the Vancouver side of the equation. And the seismic project office is actually a joint venture between Vancouver and the ministry. So they both own it. Then we have the ministry side, which is the long range facility plan guidelines, which we did the Coles notes on. Then they have capital planning rules, which we'll get into. And then they have BC area standards, which we'll also get into. And then there are some grants. So lots of different grants out there. So kind of need a vision to align this all and to make it all, fit together. So that again is where the long range facility plan can make it all fit together. And for it to fit together, at the top, you need vision and values. So what are those? So we've been working again, giant collaborative effort in many parents, many hours of discussion. And we kind of boiled it down to these broad themes. So the takeaway here is, think long-term, define long range and understand what long range means. It is not 10 years. It has to be way further longer. So current planning is not holistic. It is short-term. So we definitely need to look at that and tackle that head on. Another big giant one is, if we're looking at a long range facilities plan, well, it should be based on where kids live and where they will live. That sounds simple. However, that's not the way it's done. And a lot of people are shocked by this. The way that planning is done today is based on where kids go to school. So when we look at, fundamental equity issues, there is a fundamental problem with the way that we're planning today based on equity alone. Then, of course, we look at other problems such as high growth, no growth. Again, big issues there. So that is, something that we want to tackle. And again, a variety of options. At least give me an option of what the future would look like if we based it on where people live and will live versus basing it on where people go to school. And then another big one is setting capacity targets by school, by zones, for the district overall. And this one has a lot of prior art. So prior art means, who's done it before and who's done well at it. And our neighbor Richmond is doing great at this. They basically say, here is where our capacity is today, and here's an achievable capacity target that we want in the future, and is still going to be built on resiliency, and is still going to have room. So it doesn't have to be red line situations all the time. Will there be difficult decisions that have to be made? Yes, there will. Well, provide incentives for those. And this one is, I'll tackle this head on. Say we have two schools that are close to each other. They're both 100 years old. Today, the plan is, well, we'll enrollment manage one of them. We'll upgrade one seismically, and parents will kind of shift automatically, and then we'll close one down. That's not the way things should be done. The way things should be done is a long-range plan that says, we see this problem. We've done our check with the city. There's no density coming here. Perhaps one option should be, if we build a brand new school that goes beyond area standards, will that satisfy the community? So again, challenging the status quo, looking at different ways of doing things, and then providing the incentives for that to happen. Digging in a little deeper, we want to put kids first today and tomorrow. What's happening today, in my opinion, is there's a lot of financialization and efficiency that's been put forward, and kids kind of take a secondary seat to that. We heard Mark talk passionately about, Cavell and them upgrading the school and then later on expanding it. Well, that upsets the kids twice. There's disruption there for the kids. That doesn't serve the communities today, because the school is still going to turn away kids who live in the area. So this is, putting kids first in our thinking has to be there as a value. Public education should be the first choice for parents who want public education. And this is coming up. I went with a group of parents to visit Honorable George Heyman at his office. And the parents were upset because a few of them lived in the Olympic Village area, and a few of them live in the school that is the Olympic Village catchment, which is Simon Fraser. And Simon Fraser will have something like about 105 kids apply for 40 kindergarten spots. So that's quite shocking. And there's a lot of upset families there because they can live right next to the school, but they're entered a lottery. Official words are draw, and the draw will pick the names. Well, some parents said, if we don't get the lottery, we will put our kids into a closer private school. It's not our choice, but what will end up happening to us. And that is not the way that we want our public education system to work. So we need to get this planning right. Can't emphasize it enough, but think out long range, define that. I would say define that 25 to 40 years. Some people will say 25 to 30 years, whatever it is. We know that 10 is not it. So make it long range. Integrate equity as a core principle. We talked about equity before, and this is something that is important. If we look at every single decision that we have as a value, equity should be front and center right out there. So when we're planning, everything is done around the equity lens. Do we have every situation taken care of? So if there are situations that cannot be taken care of by each and every school, well, then are they broken down and taken care of by appropriate zones? And that is at a minimum that we would want to see every area of our city, being able to have facilities that foster equity. We want local schools. Everyone wants local schools. It can't be perfectly local, but it has to be a value and part of our vision that we shoot for. Vancouver was actually designed very well to provide for local schools. So that's kind of cool, is that we've got a good base to work off of. And one of the key partners here is the City of Vancouver. A partnership with the City of Vancouver has to be tight, integrated. When I first started volunteering, I was surprised to learn that the school board only meets on a quarterly basis with the City of Vancouver. And I believe that's increased. So we're making progress. But what does that look like, and how do parents know what that progress is? What have we learned from the City of Vancouver about where density is? How can we influence the City of Vancouver and say, maybe you should put density in these areas because there is lots of school space, there's parks close by. So why are you not planning for more density in these areas that could take it and handle it? So there's got to be a tight partnership there. And what we would love to do is we would love to see the Vancouver School Board sign on as an official partner on the Vancouver plan that will plan out the next 30, 40, 50 years in Vancouver. So schools have to be part of that, the tight part of that. Another, item is around safe routes. So we want to have that sense of what the Vancouver School Board can control within its own 100% within its own realm is fostering walking, biking, and rolling to school. So one easy way to foster that is by having the facilities that foster that. So grade A bike shelters and bike storage, covered bike storage would be really awesome. Lockers so that you can put your gear in before you go inside the building. So that's a new one that's out there in a lot of places. Even showers, staff could take advantage of showers. So, how do we want to look at our own facilities that we can take care of to foster that safe routes and active transportation? And then partnering with GAME on the city side, so each school has a really master planned out safe route, walking, bike paths, and slow zones, speed bumps, all of that, because we definitely need to keep our kids safe. And there's some hurdles when it comes to obstacles, they call them, but busy roads, traffic areas, and those have to be calm to make sure our kids are safe. Going more on capacity and equity, we want education that is well-rounded. So we want to treat the entire space that's needed for the total education of a child as essential. We don't want this non-enrolling yet this essential space definition. We don't want this, let's calculate capacity based on 100-year-old blueprints. So this school had this many classrooms 100 years ago, so that's still your capacity. And that's what paints that narrative today about 10,000 empty seats in Vancouver. When they say that, that's based on those old blueprints. And again, based on those old long-range facility plan guidelines, we had to use those old blueprints. Based on the new long-range facility plan guidelines, we can now go into a school and say, how is it being used today? And we can calculate our own capacity today. And then we can project out what does our capacity should be. So that's kind of really cool and something we should take advantage of, because without that, we're planning for 100% capacity all the time. We're always in a red line situation. And if a pandemic can't teach us that we should not be in a red line situation, then I don't know what can. But this is something that is super important for us to define capacity targets. Lots of PACs raise money for arts, sports, technology. Some PACs can't. We want more equity along those lines too. Not necessarily a facilities issue, but it is a facilities issue when the spaces are not there. So we want those spaces there for art, sports, technology. And then our facilities, again, we talked about this in terms of the equity issue around zones. And, if a school cannot have all the facilities for a student, then each zone should have at least that. So for applied skill and choice programs, that should be equitable across zones of the city. We're almost done this part, and then we're gonna take another little break and open up the discussion. And here it's about showing leadership. So we want the trustees to show leadership. And a lot of that has to do with advocating for changes and challenging the status quo. I will call them flawed. That's my word, because I don't like these policies. But there are policies out there that, in my opinion, are quite flawed. And I'll provide a few examples of that too later on. But they put money before kids. And that to me is why they're flawed. Everyone talks about sustainability, and we even have targets. We've got 2030 target. We got to hit this sustainability. Got to bring our fossil fuel number of CO2 emissions way down. But then how much do we really care about that if we're not funding for sustainability? So if we're still in saying that, well, we're not going to do a replacement school, we're just going to upgrade the walls and building, you can keep your old boiler and keep it going, but you got these targets to meet. How does that work? So kind of need more of an apples to apples kind of comparison there, where maybe lowest cost should exclude the extra money for sustainability. And then that goes into seismic options. Seismic options, today they're replace, upgrade, or kind of a mix. And that doesn't happen very often. So kind of replace or upgrade is what our options are today. And if we replace a school, well, it can't be really downsized or upsized or what they call rate sized. So it's going to be the same, which is a challenge for schools that could be in a growing area. So we heard earlier today, Solomon, you were talking about Nightingale, fast growing neighborhood, lots of family centric housing coming around Nightingale. So if we don't, and Nightingale is going to go through seismic. So if Nightingale gets a replacement school, well, it's going to be 30% physically smaller than what it is today, but it will only be built for the same amount of kids. So that's kind of an issue. So we need to think about the seismic options and have more of them. And then, we want to talk about innovation on, our lands. So Vancouver School Board has about $7 billion worth of property. It's for the purposes of education. So we need to look at that lens first. Putting kids first is for the purpose of education. But there are sites, there are maintenance sites that are not being used today for the purpose of education. And thankfully, I'm very, very happy to say that there is a policy today that the school board cannot dispose of land outright. And that policy has some nuances. They can lease it, they can sell a portion, but they cannot dispose of it outright, which is good. So when we look at that part there, what can we do around generating money with the properties that we don't need today for education? So thinking out of the box there and providing options that are transparent is key. And I said the word transparent for a reason. We'll get to that in a bit. So here, now we finally take a little break. And that was quite a bit. Thank you. I'm gonna stop sharing for a moment and open it up. Please put up some hands and comments and make it interactive. Hi, Sean, go ahead.
Vic, do you want to go into the sordid history of capacity targets in the district?
I don't know if I can do that very well because I actually got involved in this, so January-ish 2019. So I don't know the history of it in any big sense here, but here's my sense. My sense is that for a long time, going back to 2016 and some media reports I read back then, is Vancouver's got 10,000 empty seats. Okay, well, where are they? Most of them are on the east side, so we're going to close a bunch of schools. We're going to close 20 schools, 18 will be on the east side. That's kind of what we heard back in 2016. And then, back then, I would get correspondence from my MLA, Adrian Dix. Let's go save Carleton. And I go, yeah, I went to Carleton. So I would go there and I'd rally, right? So yeah, the save third guy Carleton. I'd be there. So, that's my kind of background on what I knew about this narrative. And what I know about this narrative today is, one, it's based on these old blueprints, which, how can you define capacity based on old blueprints? When we actually go to a school today and you ask the school, hey, where are your empty spots? Where are your, many classrooms that are empty? Aside from some large high schools, you go to elementary school, they're using that space. They're using the space for other purposes. Alan on our DPAC executive does our childcare committee. And a lot of those spaces are used for childcare. So when we look at those spaces, we need to know where are the true empty seats today. So that's where I would describe it. Is there a certain line that you wanted to provide more insight? Because you got more history than I do.
Sure. Let me go into a bit of my understanding of the history. So let's start with the 2016 LRFP, which I would summarize as a plan to reduce the overall or to increase the overall capacity of the district to 95% based on ministry mandate, by essentially using the seismic program as the means of doing that. So it was a LRFP over 14 years to 2030. And the goal was 95% because that's what the ministry said. Now that was a rather large change from the previous statements that came out from the VSP, which was essentially that it saw 90% as a pretty good capacity target across the district. And the primary reasons for that is they believe that there needed to be some resiliency in this system to account for any educational needs that would arise and any essentially emergent educational issues that would come up. So 90% used to be the standard that the VSP would target. Then it was 95 in 2016, like I said. The minister at the time dropped that shortly after the LRFP was adopted in Vancouver. But replaced it with a capital plan instructions that effectively made it a 100% capacity target based on the way that funding would flow. So we've been kind of living with that hidden capacity target for a few years until we looked into it last year as DPAC executive. And it scares me because there was a pretty big stink. The trustees at the time in 2016 passed a motion basically saying, yes, we'll aim for this 95% target, but we don't believe it has any educational value. So it was seen essentially as an accounting tool and nothing to do with the education that we provided in the district. So that was on record by the trustees at the time. So all of a sudden we're at 100% capacity based on the capital plan instructions and the way that the seismic mitigation plan is intended to be utilized. And I can just say, I asked last year what kind of capacity targets we're looking at going forward. And the answer that I got was, we're not going to talk about capacity targets anymore. And that scares me even more than looking at the capital plan instructions, because there's a complete lack of transparency there. So I'm worried that we're on a very, very fast, slippery slope towards oblivion around that capacity in the district. So it's an issue that I would hope that DPAC would pursue and actually try to get very clear, transparent guidelines around that. I mean, this is something that the board should actually be looking into and providing direction on as part of that high level package that we want. We look at other districts like, I'll use, because you gave this one to me, Vic. We look at Richmond. Richmond's very clear in their LRFP. Their district-wide target is 85 to 90%. So it's actually even lower than what Vancouver was, and that's reasonable. I know that there's people, I think I saw Joel in here somewhere, and other people that I know through DPAC and other advocacy, who will talk about a 70% target as being the right way to go. So it really scares me that we're going on a pure efficiency model for all of this, that we're essentially looking at it from an austerity perspective, rather than trying to actually figure out what the educational value is around space and setting our targets based on that first, and then looking at the rest.
It's a very important discussion. Thank you. And I'll summarize that just very quickly. So if we got the narrative out there today is 10,000 empty seats, if we look at how our space is actually used today, not based on 100-year-old blueprints, and then we find that we have 5,000 empty seats. Then if we look at how many students we have, let's just say 50,000. And then if we say that we want to have a 10% buffer, then we are fine today.
Well, that's the second part of this narrative, which is who's actually setting the calculus that we're using to determine capacity. My reading of those guidelines, and I know some of the trustees' reading of the guidelines, is that the district has leeway to interpret those instructions in a way that lets the district set that calculus.
Correct.
So if we're not changing our calculus, we're still following that same bloody narrative of 10,000 empty seats. Or if we look at the 2019 draft LRFP, it's 12,000 empty seats. So we're shooting ourselves in the foot if we're not actually going deep into this and resetting everything and taking a fresh look as you said, how we're using space, and then figuring out what we're actually trying to achieve as a district.
Sorry,
Correct.
I'm going to break in here. Vic, you're at the time, you've got 4 speakers lined up, and you've got 4 hands raised, and you're at the time that you would like to be starting the next slide. So I don't know how you want to go on.
Thank you. Well, we got to take the speakers, so we'll try to adjust. Michelle, go ahead.
Hi, just real quick. I'm just kind of wondering how we can expect either the school district or the school district and the city of Vancouver to manipulate or control like a free real estate market. Like, I mean, like that's basically essentially what we're asking them to do almost. And to your point about not being able to sell off assets, can the school district like trade assets, like sell one bunch of land so that they can purchase land where kids are now living instead? Is that allowed?
You know,
I don't know if
really,
you know the answer.
really good question. I'm not sure on the answer on that one.
We have, I believe they did do, I have seen, I'm pretty sure I saw somewhere in the minutes there was actually a small trade last year, but it was like with the Parks Board or something. So I suspect that it is possible, but I think there's probably lots of caveats and analysis around any given proposal.
I love the idea in the sense of moving schools. So you don't necessarily close a school, we move it. You know, so a brilliant idea, and that one that we should explore further. Thank you. Joanne.
Hi there. Sorry, I'm going to try to do this here. So I'm just curious, we're in a, my kids go to David Livingston. We're in a very similar situation to, I guess, Nightingale and Cavell and Wolf and all the other schools that are kind of undergoing or about to undergo seismic projects for upgrades versus rebuilds. And I'm curious, like, when we're talking about like a long range plan, if there have been any rumblings around how we impact something like COVID into this scenario, because we're talking seismic, and seismic is obviously a huge deal for us. We, you know, talk about the big one never happening here, and it's like something that's really big, but a pandemic is happening right now. And, you know, we at our school and like the others are concerned over the fact that, you know, the province is going to invest $17.3 million in upgrading our school. And 3 years from now, we could move into a pandemic and still have windows that don't open and HVAC that is poor, and there's not hand washing stations, and there's no flow for classrooms and for movement and things like that. And even, you know, what you said earlier, Vic, about you know, the building of a new school and having it being 30% smaller, when a pandemic shows us that we should have it 30% larger, so that we can have proper flow and we can have space for kids to go that are outside of their current classroom. Like, you know, I know everyone's eating lunch in their classrooms right now, but even when we didn't have a pandemic, our kids ate lunch in their classroom because we don't have a lunchroom. We only have a gym as the only spare spot in the school. So it definitely is short-sighted, and I'm just, I guess, curious how that fits in to be part of this plan and part of the advocacy for, you know, how we make smart choices moving forward and smart investments. Like the thought of, you know, as a taxpayer in the area, my kids are not even going to benefit from any of this because they'll be moving on to Tupper by the time they move back into school. But as a taxpayer and in our community and your property value for your homes, like those things are all important in not being short-sighted.
Joanne, we're going to address a bit of that today, but I mean, the answer is really simple. The answer is actually, you were not involved. So the Livingstone community was not involved into what option and what cost exactly, and how they calculated the cost, and what apples to apples of a comparison is between replacing or upgrading, because did sustainability count? Did accessibility count? Did water quality count? Did air quality count? So none of those were really addressed. So we'll get into that. But you know, it's something where we're not involved in the seismic process. That's the answer. and we need to be involved. Bipin.
Thank you, Vic. It's been a really great presentation. I just want to say that, I want to see more data that is driven by what produces the best outcomes for children. It's ultimately what matters to me when thinking about a plan for the future. Also, I was the person that was asking about how does First Nations, how are they involved in this long range facilities plan? Because that's definitely a huge part of challenging the status quo, is bringing in more of that learning from the land. Most schools, already complain that they don't have enough outdoor spaces for kids. That seems like it's a huge part of the Indigenous education. And so that was just my question around that. And I don't know if you're going to address it.
Yeah, no, so the parts that I know is that it's a mandate. So the new guidelines say that the First Nations must be consulted. It's not a recommendation. So they will be consulted, and I hope they provide that kind of feedback where we have Indigenous education in every single one of our facilities baked in. That would be fantastic. So that, again, that's the kind of vision that we want to paint in the long range facilities plan. Eventually, every single school will get upgraded. Every single school will be brand new one day. It will get replaced eventually. So what do we want that future to look like? And that's exactly where that kind of value would be super to have right baked in as one of our values for Indigenous education in every single facility is one of the goals that we want. And then of course there's the special schools that we have, which have other concerns as well. And also, the socioeconomic disadvantage issues, food issues, there's many things around that too, that facilities could cater towards being better on. Last insight from Lindsay.
You know what, Vic, I'll wait till the end of your presentation. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. We'll go back to sharing. Okay, so one of the other elements. This one will be quick because this one is kind of simple. This one is something that is separate today. So the school district has created a separate strategy. So this is a separate document, a separate process. It's not part of the long range facilities plan. It's completely separate, and it's called the land and asset strategy. The goal behind this is to raise money from the lease or disposition. And again, the disposition today, the rules are we can't dispose of an entire site, but we could dispose of sell part of it. But most of the money here is really coming around leasing. So we're still going to own the land, but we're going to lease it out and we're going to make some income on that. And then with that income, we're going to be able to build modern schools. We're going to have some money to build modern schools. So on a general basis, sounds good. And you know what? Sign me up for that. I got no issue with using some of our lands to create revenue. And I don't think many people would, so long as it does not affect education. So long as our kids are still first, let's do it. The problem with this is very, very big. And the problem is that it's a separate document, that it's separate. It's not part of the long range facilities plan. It's going to live and breathe on its own, which means it's going to drive behavior. And behavior means every single decision based on where a choice program should be, where a catchment should be, what should be seismically upgraded, where should we put our maintenance money into, where should we put our kids into, enrollment management. every single decision we based on a hidden closure list. Because going back, and how do I go back? I go back here, it classifies timelines. So 1 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years, and 5 to 10 years. And you know, 5 to 10 years is not a long time. But if you've already identified potential schools that will close in 5 to 10 years, and you're going to make decisions on that, that means you're making decisions today. So I don't feel comfortable with that, and neither does DPAC. So DPAC here urges the trustees to limit this land and asset strategy to the small scope of 1 to 3 years, and then to make this part of the long range facilities plan so that the land and asset strategy is where it should be. It should be a component of the long range facilities plan. So it ties in with our overall strategy. So here, I just want to open up. A lot of people don't know about this, you know, and I want to start, I'll start here by asking Robin. Robin, when you found out about this, how did you feel?
I think what floored me, Vic, is when you described for me that this is going to be a document that wouldn't be publicly available because it has to do with the disposal of real estate, which is a reason why public bodies can get around free access to information legislation. And that really scared me, especially when there's already a sense that there's an agenda for certain schools or already prior intention. The consultation last January, the survey included full sections on school closures. And there's none of the space for talking about other solutions or coming to a shared understanding and vision. So yeah, this was scary as hell and really worrisome. I will say that as far as I don't have so much of a concern about making long-term decisions about places like Kingsgate Mall. You know, there are some very lucrative real estate sites on commercial property that I think the should be leveraged to whatever extent they can be as soon as possible, you know, into the long term. But for school sites, this shouldn't be determining that in such a non-transparent way.
So, you know, just to repeat that, if someone were to do a freedom of information on the land and asset strategy, the answer back would be a blacked out document because freedom of information does not apply to real estate. So this is super scary, all the more reason why it needs to be part of the land and asset strategy, needs to be part of the long range facilities plan. Any more insights onto this one? Great, I think that was simple because there's actually not a lot to say about that. It kind of makes sense. Let's use our land to maximize revenue. Let's do that in a transparent way. Okay, so quickly on catchment and choice programs. So going back to local schools, and that's kind of what the catchment should represent is, you know, here's your local school. The part of land and asset, I got the land and asset going on now. No, the part of the long range facilities plan, most school districts do include a catchment and a choice program review. Vancouver will probably not do a catchment review in their long range facilities plan. And that's kind of because there's not a lot you can do with catchments. So there was a catchment review that was done in 2018 and it didn't go anywhere because of some sibling priority issues that wasn't well thought out. But it was very incremental. It was kind of like a small shift, small little slice of a neighborhood here, move it over there. It wasn't anything, you know, fundamental that would solve a problem. And the problem again would be high growth in certain areas, no growth, flat in certain areas, maybe some decline in certain areas. So a catchment review can't solve that problem. So that's kind of why it didn't go anywhere, and it's not something that where anybody's really encouraging the VSB to really review, but it has to be something that we look at some point. There was a standalone French catchment area done, did a standalone French catchment review in 2018. So the French choice program review was done. Let's just say French choice program review was done, and the implications of that are kind of unknown. But where we stand on that is equity. Choice program should have equity across all areas of the school district. We do know that catchments are becoming difficult to manage. So out of the 72 catchment elementary schools, 29 this year had wait lists. And out of the 72 catchment elementary schools, 30 had extra spots available. And just a bit of an insight on how difficult catchments are becoming to manage is that there's certain catchments now that have almost designated overflow. So that is something that has to be looked at from an equity lens and a fairness lens as well, because certain schools that have priority to enter another school that could perhaps take away spots from other neighboring kids is a bit of an issue. So it is becoming to the point where Band-Aid fixes now are going to start breaking. So it was before, if you can't get into your local school, you could get into your next local school. Today's situation is sometimes you can't get into your local school, you can't get into your next local school, and you can't even get into your next to next local school. So things are at that point in certain areas of the city. So that's something that needs to be addressed. And we must address this, head on, because the Band-Aid solutions don't work. And I wanted to stop here again, just to open it up for your insights onto catchments and any stories that you may have about what you're hearing from, fellow colleagues and parents, maybe PAC members, about how a lottery or those kind of things can be very, very disruptive in terms of a family's planning and a family's life. And of course, solutions. How do we address this?
Man.
Gord?
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to the slide a little bit. I've got it in front of me, and just provide a little bit more context, right? I mean, exactly what Vic said. In some areas, this city, specifically the Olympic Village area, basically the catchment, rejigging the catchments won't do anything. It won't solve any. It basically won't solve any of the problems, and and same thing with the choice programs. In that area of the city, the pressures are such that these incremental tweaks aren't going to do anything. I mean, that doesn't mean they're going to stop thinking about these incremental tweaks, and that's kind of you're going to see pressure on programs of choice, because they are choice programs, and there's going to be, you're going to hear more suggestions where a program of choice might be moved or collapsed, right? So the issue where they were proposing to move the French immersion stream from the Hudson Elementary School, because they were having issues getting the local catchment kids into the kindergarten, and they ended up moving the French immersion program. That sort of thing will continue to happen. That sort of thing will continue to happen as we have these pressures. Those choice programs will be one of the first things that they move to try to address overflow issues, and it's going to cause a lot of disruption.
Yeah, and I think that's where at least having a vision, again, long range, defining that, what things should look like in the future. Any more insights into this? Okay, good. So we're almost at the end. So there's only a few more things. Okay, here's a great one now. So here, the Vancouver Project Office. So this is the Seismic Project Office. I call it a JV between the Vancouver School Board and the ministry. Big giant problems in this is our elected trustees are not involved. So we elect our trustees to, their purpose is to give us trust, establish trust between the public and our education system. So we trust them to oversee things and make sure things are going well and to take care of our interests and our kids' interests. And they're not allowed to be involved in hundreds of millions of dollars of decisions. So there's something wrong there. And there's something so wrong there that I feel very passionate about this in terms of, I would say that this is an affront to our democracy. And when the public cannot be involved because our trustees are not involved and decisions are made behind closed doors, whether it's an upgrade or whether it's a new school, and based on the lowest cost, but the rules for the lowest cost we kind of know. So that's kind of interesting because they're not apples to apples. So if you told me the lowest cost was kind of apples to apples, then I'd say, okay, well, there's something better here. But right now it's not run transparently. It is only in Vancouver. So this goes back, this was established in, two terms ago. So it's been going on since 2014. So back then, the relationship between the school board and the ministry was not a good one. And that's when it was established. And it's perpetuated. And since then, Surrey and Richmond have the same project offices, which is great because a project office is there to accelerate seismic, to make that whole program go faster so that, it's not relearning everything from one school to the next school. It's basically, we built this new school here. What do we learn? What do we do right? Okay, let's do it again. What do we do? What do we learn right? Let's do it again. So it's that project office that is designed for accelerating seismic. And Surrey and Richmond have one. But their MOU, so Memorandum of Understandings, do not remove their trustees and their public from the seismic process. So only in Vancouver do we have our trustees, and us as public are not allowed to be involved. So this is not right. We heard Mark super passionately, Cabal parent. Thank you, Mark, because you basically recapped this slide right at the beginning. But the travesty out there is pots of money. So there's this pot of money for seismic, and then there's this pot of money for expansion. Then there's another pot of money, another pot of money, another pot of money, another pot of money. And there's different pots of money. You add all those pots up, it's obvious. It's like so obvious. It's like build a new, bigger Cabal today. You will save so much more money. You'll be putting kids first. But they can't seem to combine these pots of money. Again, if the public is not involved, there will never be a combination of those pots of money. If the long-range facilities plan doesn't point this out, then there will never be a proper change. So at the very least, the long-range facility plan must have an option that there should be a combination of pots of money to do the right thing for our kids and frankly for the taxpayer too. But we're not here to talk about taxpayer, we're here to talk about the kids. Disrupting them twice, 3 times is not right. So the Seismic Project Office the giant problem is that most things will be upgrades if we don't change this and have the public involved. So some of these buildings are beautiful, but I use the word relic. If a building is 100 years old, it has lead paint, it has lead pipes, it has asbestos, it has HVAC concerns, it's got fossil fuel boiler, it's got some sustainability problems. It was not built for accessibility. There are no ramps, there are no elevators. It's not safe for water, so we'll have this sign there, run the water for 5 minutes. Pandemic times, it's not built for, the ventilation and the open windows that we need, that we currently care about, but we should always care about these kind of things. And it's not going to last. It ain't going to last. So yes, a stopgap. Again, if we look at the life of a facility, it should last, especially if we're going to seismically upgrade something and spend like 80% of it work. So instead of spending $24 million to build it brand new, well, we'll spend $18 million to seismically upgrade it. And then if there's an earthquake, it won't injure or kill our kids, but it won't be able to be reused. So then we have to build a new one. But if we built a new one first, guess what? It can act as an emergency preparedness shelter. The kids can still go back to school. So those are some big issues on the seismic program and how it's not run today well. And again, it's not going to change unless we change the first principle, which is allow us, the public, to be involved. We won't slow down your process. We're not going to be obstructionists and say, okay, now we don't care about safe seats and we're going to basically bog down the school into, designing every single detail of the school. No, we want to move fast. We want our kids to be in safe seats. We want the seismic program to accelerate, but we also want to make sure it compares apples to apples and the public's involved, and we build the right facilities for the generations of kids. Two more things, and then we're going to have open discussion for the rest of the time. So on ministry capital planning rules, this is long, complicated document. I'm just going to mention one thing, which was in 2015, the definition of lowest cost changed. Prior to 2015, the definition said correctly, calculate the lowest cost based on a 40-year life cycle. So today, I know we have Mark from Cavell, and we had another parent from Livingstone, we have Nightingale. When you look at this definition for these schools, it means everything. The lowest cost definition being on a 40-year life cycle means automatic replacement, because these schools will cost so much more to maintain if they're just upgraded versus replaced. So this is in the ministry capital funding rules. It changed in 2015. We can change it back. This is an easy one. So we need people to be aware, and the long-range facilities plan has to point this out. The trustees have to point this out. Then there's another big thing called the ministry area standards, BC area standards. Terrible. New schools are 30% smaller than the schools that they replace. Why does size matter? It matters because there's essential space that the kids need. There's essential space for the arts, the drama, the music. There's essential space that's needed for athletics and sports programs that are, beyond just a regular main gym. There's space that's needed for the community. The staff needs a staff room. That's not even allocated. Small things, but important things, like a stage in the gym, that's no longer there. Why take out the stage? Some parents even said, we will build the stage. And they said, no, you can't do that. Then they said, okay, we will fundraise for the stage. Then they said, no, you can't do that. This is not right. Covered areas. So there is a clause, and this is comedy at this point. The clause says, we will build a covered playground, not a playground, covered play area outside if it rains more than 2,000 millimeters. Well, we're just shy. So that's about 6 feet. And in Vancouver, a good year, we get 5.5 feet of rain. So that's kind of where we're at there. So there's, big issues around that. I want to thank everyone here for bearing with me. I know there's a lot of information here. And we are at 5 minutes left to 9:30, but I will stick around. And if other people want to stick around, we can discuss. But officially, Lindsay, you got an insight?
I don't know if I have an insight.
Oh, okay. I think your
I have
hand's
a
up from the
question.
last time.
Yeah, my hand's up. I do have a observation and a question. I really appreciate the presentation, Vic. Thank you. It is so much, and it feels quite overwhelming, frankly, given how critical action is needed at Nightingale and how it feels like it's a very far away from any of that action. So I have sort of, I guess, 2 questions. One, our parents are worried. They're worried every day. And, we've been looking into this and trying to get answers and trying to figure out what's going to happen next since I've started sending my kid to that school, and he's in grade 4 now, without anything clearing, frankly, and without a sense of where the road is leading. So my question is, in parallel to this, a number of us have taken on trying to do some mitigation in the school that would, measures that would basically aid in survivability of the children and the staff. And that could be like an early warning system, or looking, the PAC was very interested in figuring out if we could do our own fundraising to figure out how we could brace things and make things safer in certain areas. And we were really dissuaded by the board and by everyone that we dealt with there. And it feels like we can't get any answers about what's going to happen to the building in the long term. And I understand the process is complicated, but we can't get any encouragement to try and make it safe in the short term. But they want us to fundraise for playgrounds, and those are important, and I get it, but the safety of the children is also important. And I'm just wondering if anybody else on this call has explored these things, has thought about it. It feels like an impossible thing to do, to just sit here and do nothing while we wait or advocate for a long range plan that'll serve everybody in the district. But it feels like we're being told to sit and do nothing.
Interesting. I didn't know that. But from a perspective of, that's something we'll bring up, but from a perspective of early warning systems and, process and practice and extra drills, I don't know why that would be denied. You're not shoring up walls or roofs yourselves. Can you describe a little bit more about the nature of what the PAC was trying to do?
There was a couple of things. There was one looking at trying to participate in some of the early warning system. There was a pilot that the Vancouver School Board was doing. There's a lot of work that's coming out of UBC, and we had some sort of connections there. And so we were looking at doing that. Obviously, there's some upgrades that would have to be done to our school to make that happen because it's from 1912. But we were dissuaded from that pretty strongly by the board. Staff, obviously not an actual trustee, didn't come and tell us that. And then we looked at, what we might do in order to brace things in certain areas where there's a potential for lots of things to fall on kids and staff. And we were also told that we weren't allowed to look at that or fundraise money for that. And while I see Adrian's comments about how it shouldn't be paid for by parents, I totally understand that, Adrian, but it's also really difficult to sit by and do nothing for decades. And so we were desperate to try and make inroads somewhere. We're problem solving kind of group of people. And so that's what we've tried to do. And we've been really discouraged by the board.
Okay, that's news to me. I didn't know about that. But, if this is interesting. So if things are going to take so long, what you've raised here is what to do in the meantime,
Exactly. Yeah.
right? So I mean, that's a fundamental takeaway here is, okay, how long will this take? Now, everyone says 2030. It's not going to happen by 2030. We know that, right? So one is set some realistic timelines and tell us and lay out that long range plan again of what things could happen. You don't have to name school sites, but get some kind of commitment that we can do this many schools per year. So then prioritize them, which schools, every school does have a rating today. Well, unfortunately, so many of them compete for the rating. They're all, there's so many of them that are H1. So what we need to do is we need to look at what to do in the meantime and have a plan for the meantime. So thank you for that, and leave that with me. You know, the plan for the meantime is kind of important.
Yeah.
Vic,
So-
I'm sorry, it's Karen. This was Florence Nightingale, correct? That we're
That's
talking
correct.
about?
Yeah, that's correct.
So when my children were in Florence Nightingale, it was raining into buckets in the hallway that connects the gym to the downstairs to the upstairs. And that's 5 years ago. It was raining into buckets. If that school is in an earthquake, we're digging people out. Like there is no reason why that school is still a school that is being discussed about whether or not it gets upgraded. There are schools that have been upgraded that did not need it as much as that school. It is a terrifying school to have your children in. And for the first 2 years, I didn't send my kids there because it's so scary. And it's a block from my house. And then I did send my children there. But I didn't sleep at night. So it's an absolute aberration that it hasn't been addressed.
I agree.
Okay. Paula. Paula, are you there? Paula
Thank you.
Cameron? Yeah. Hi.
Thank you. I am really moved by all of the investigation and research and presentation that you've done this evening. Really super impressed, super thankful. And sadly, it's been my experience as chair of McGee for the McGee PAC for 2 years, being involved, you know, as a parent at Maple Grove as well, where we're getting a new school. Over the last 4 years of my involvement, what I've seen is that there's a profound systemic dysfunction where parents and PAC and DPAC are not seriously given, where consultation is not sincere. And everything that we're talking about tonight is valid, it's critical, and we are not being taken seriously, we're not being included, and we're not being part of a joint decision-making process. And that my concern is that until that starts to, that key issue is shifted or changed, we can sit here with all of our intelligence and all of our knowledge and all of our ideas for change. And behind the scenes, it's the staff that make the decision, similar to when I was working at the City of Vancouver. Who runs the City of Vancouver? The staff, not the politicians as much as the staff. So my interest is systemic foundational change so that everything that you've presented tonight actually can make a difference.
Paul, thank you. I will say that the staff are professionals. They'll take direction from the trustees. So if the trustees set that direction, and a simple one is define long range, 10 years is not it. We know that. Another one is at least give us an option of where kids live and will be a thesis of planning. Another one is set what we want to see as our red lines. So define what our current capacity is, and then tell us where you want to set it at. So those are, easy ones that are directional based on values and having vision, that the trustees need to basically say, this is what we've heard, and this is what we believe in. And the staff are total pros. They will then execute. There's no doubt there. But if given to their own devices, then the staff are going to take what hard work they've already done, which is last year's plan, many hours have went into it, can't throw it out unless someone tells us that it's based on the old rules. Please use the new rules. So staff will do their own self-preservation and say, well, we know this. We'll just build on what we know. We don't got to think. No one's telling us anything different. So I think there's a bit of that going on. Mark.
It's hard not to get emotional at all this. Just going back to, well, Paula, you just mentioned the systemic piece. And yeah, I agree, Vic, the long range plan certainly, but in your presentation, you alluded to the systemic governance issues too, the trustees not allowed to communicate or liaise with the seismic office. And Paula, at Cavell, we had a similar experience to what you just described. When they do seismic upgrading, they do this, there's a fancy name for some report. It's like a feasibility study, but it's not called a feasibility study, where they look at those options to get at the lowest cost. We asked for those and were denied multiple times. And trustees we got the sense, they never told us directly, but we got the sense that they were discouraged from asking to see those reports. So there is a real lack of what you said, an affront to democratic principles and a lack of transparency. And so, Lindsay, we weren't discouraged from making proposals to do things. We were basically told by everyone, well, no, we're not allowed. That's the seismic office. They have their whole thing and we don't interfere with them. And it got so bad just to give everyone a tangible example of how the dysfunction of the governance paradigm. At Cavell, there's a main school, but there's also a portable that was built there 85 years ago. And the potential plans to eventually expand the school call for an extended wing where that portable is. And I said at an open house to a project planning officer, I said, wow, it's too bad they're going to seismically upgrade this portable and then conceivably bulldoze it when they do an expansion at some point. And he looked like the irony, there was no sense of irony on his face. He just looked at me and said, yeah, it's too bad, but that's just the way it works. Like there's no acknowledgement that something might be wrong with that kind of system. And Lindsay, I hate to, it's like we tried also, like, is there anything better we could do more than a seismic upgrade to a school that's just going to need ongoing extensive costs, like Vic was alluding to? And it was just no, all the way through, because it's just, this approach just seems so baked in. So yes, long range planning, but I think a further step back to say, we need to call this complete governance dysfunction and what's a new decision-making approach. But I don't know how to do that.
Well, Mark, again, the trustees have to take away their own power. So no one has told the trustees that you cannot be involved. The trustees have to kind of agree to sign that memorandum of understanding that says, we will shut up, we will not be involved, we'll be quiet on seismic. We don't want to be involved. So that's kind of worse that way. And again, this is not something that our current batch of trustees signed off on. This was started in 2014 when there was something going on way before my time into, advocacy. But I don't even want to know the background. But there's something going on. The relationship between the ministry and the school board wasn't good. I don't think it's great today either, but we need to make sure that it is a good relationship. And that kind of relationship takes some time to make good, but you can't have these kind of things that just get automatically renewed. And every trustee says, oh, you know what? Someone else did it before. I'm just going to sign it again and we'll be out of the picture. So that's kind of how that goes on. And then that's how it becomes systemic, which is bad. So someone's got to wake up and take a pause and say, you know what, we're going to not do that. Sean, and then Gord.
Thanks, Vic. Yeah, we don't. So you presented, I hate to describe it as a mishmash of different problems that all kind of intersect around the planning for facilities and schools. It's probably worth stepping back a little bit to separate out the ones that are directly related to the LRFP, because they're not all directly related to the LRFP, versus the ones that are about district processes versus ones that are about provincial processes. because there's different paths for advocacy and different changes needed to affect those. And they are distinct in that respect. Like if we're going to talk about area standards or funding models, that's provincial. It's not something we can affect through an LRFP. So I really think that we need to tease out the opportunities for advocacy and figure out what the right avenues for doing that are. Because a lot of that's not done through DPAC. It's not even done at the district level. It should be done through BCCPAC, and hopefully the trustees are working through BCSDA and other provincial level organizations to try to influence the ministry to change those. So we should try to separate those out. And I totally get what we're throwing a lot of problems onto this to highlight the magnitude of what we're facing, because it's a pretty daunting issue, and it's really an oppressive kind of issue once you start pulling on one string and you see just how much is left to actually try to deal with. I think it would be really good though, and because I saw a question in the chat as well about how do people get involved in advocacy here? How do they highlight these issues within their school community, within their PACs? What can they do as part of DPAC, BCCPAC, et cetera, to help make changes? So I really think that we want to try to separate those out and provide those avenues to people as if possible. I would say at a minimum, and I'm not hawking for anything here, but if your PAC's not a member of BCCPAC, that's something to consider, because it's an avenue for bringing resolutions through about this kind of stuff at the provincial level for the funding model for these different buckets of money that we see as incommensurate, and yet they're going to cause major problems down the road for schools like we've seen with Cabell, et cetera. So it would be really good to just tease those out. And I would say focus on the LRFP. I'm giving advice. Let's focus on the LRFP, because that's the thing that's right in front of us. Figure out which of these we can change, which of these we can't change. I'll say for myself, the whole issue around the MOU and the project office, they're less important in the short term to deal with, because the LRFP is staring at us with a 5-6 month timeline. Let's focus on that and do what we can to help the trustees actually make good decisions here, because what they decide today is going to be with us 30, 40, 50, 60 years down the road still, given the way that our facilities survive in the city.
I just want to thank you, Sean. I just wanted to step in here and say it's 9:40. We will hold the room open to continue the discussion, but if you've made a promise to anybody in your family that you're going to be done at 9:30, please take this opportunity to just quietly step away. Thank you very much for attending. We have PAC 101 next week. It's open to the chairs and the DPAC reps of every school. And please, if you have any concerns or just anything that you want to talk about with regards to the school restart or anything going around your schools, please do reach out to your DPAC liaisons. And yes.
Sorry, I just want to note that there were 2 things brought up in the chat that people asked that we make sure to include, whether or not an answer can be sought out here. The first one was that we are talking about an LRFP without talking about reconciliation and about making plans on somebody else's lands when we say that we are interested in reconciliation. I don't know how the LRFP also works in with the new build of housing that is coming along. Halslam has spoken at the board about that, but it's not lost on me that there are no Indigenous people in the room that I know of as we speak about plans being made on lands that aren't ours. So that was the first one. The second one is that when we are doing new builds or renovations to buildings, if we are not building elevators into them and gender neutral bathrooms as the default, with perhaps a bathroom in some basement or corner for people who can't possibly go to the bathroom in a stall built for a gender neutral bathroom, then we are probably not doing this right. So that was the second comment, was around accessibility and gender neutral facilities. Thanks.
Thank you.
I'd like to take on a bit of Sean's comments first. and then talk about Indigenous, and then talk about equity seeking populations. So with Sean's comments, I do concur with that. This presentation is designed to give an overarching education on all the issues. The long range facilities plan specifically should plan out our long range. There are some nuances in terms of when we look at, equity seeking populations and gender neutral washrooms, for example. That's not covered in the BC areas. When we put that into our long range facilities plan as a value and a statement, then it has something to do with it. So there's nuances, and that's why I wanted to provide the overview of all these separate components. But yes, we should definitely care about what the Vancouver responsibility is to make on a long range facilities plan. On the First Nations, I hope the consultation, and it's mandated, it has to be real mandated consultation, and I hope that's in-depth and real. And why I say hope is, again, going back to this timeline seems a little aggressive to me for that to be given its due diligence and its appropriateness. When you look at a timeline where you're going to present a draft plan to a committee at the end of October, well, that's not a month from now. And then you're going to get phase 2 feedback on October 5th to October 21st. Well, that's coming up very soon. How are you going to incorporate that into a draft plan that you're going to present to a committee at the end of October? Or are you taking that draft plan and then showing that draft plan to First Nations and saying, what do you think? So the nature of the consult should be really thorough. It should be meaningful. People use this term checklist consultation, and I really hope it's not that. It needs to be detailed, provided for, where there's a good amount of give and take and an understanding of what the core issues are for the First Nations people, what they would like to see. We heard a bit of a theme, Bipin, your idea of wanting their lineage and their distinct Indigenous in every aspect, outdoor learning from the land, all that in terms of every school facility having that would be ideal. But that's our perspective, and our perspective is not their perspective. So that mandatory consult from them, meaningful, is what we would want there. On equity speaking populations, we did talk about this in the DPAC facilities committee that was pointed out. We know that there's, it's great that we have signed on, SOGI 1, 2, 3, let's go. We've got the policies now, but how are we living them? So that's kind of where we need to get to, is how are we living them, and what are we doing about showing that we're living them? So if we build a brand new school, you'd think that we'd plan for that now. So in our current schools that we are building, are we planning for that today? So if the BC area standards don't cover it, then we're not planning for that. The answer is we're following the BC area standards. So again, this is where we need our own value statement, and specifically, what are those elements that we will care about always that go above and beyond the BC area standards? So those are what we need to think about in that kind of line. Kyla, do you have any questions or insights?
Well, I think your use of the term meaningful and talking about consultation reminded me that, and I do this in the work that I do in terms of the labor law, but I mean, consultation actually has meaning in law. So I'm wondering about too, in terms of holding Vancouver School Board accountable when they say they're going to, and this is, the nations can do this for themselves as well, but even in terms of just consulting with parents and consulting with community around the long range, I mean, one of the defining factors of true consultation in law is having the time to take in the information and respond to it. And so arguably, that's not necessarily true with what's happening right now on this LRFP, from the way I read this, from what you're telling us. So I'm curious whether or not DPAC or BCCPAC or whoever has those resources has ever looked to actually challenge when they make a claim of consultation. I'm not a lawyer, I work in a union, but I'm curious whether or not our members have a right to consultation, and we use that law all the time as a defense for it. And so curious about that.
Right. Well, I want to thank the trustees there, because they made that recommendation for year-long meaningful consultation. And, we need to see the trustees follow through with that, but they made that recommendation last year. And then as far as the ministry goes, it's written there, they use the term must. And I think the consultation there, when they use the term must. And then the ministry also has attached schedules. So they want to see what that consultation was about. So even with DPAC, part of the long range facilities plan will have we met with DPAC and we consulted with them based on this and this and this and this. So it has to have a digest. So this is kind of cool, is that the new guidelines have a schedule for digest. So the First Nations consultation will also have to have a schedule. We consulted the First Nations, and here's what the consultation was about. So again, that's kind of cool in that sense, that if the guidelines are followed, that's the key part. If they're followed, then we'll have those schedules and we'll have good consultation. The timeline.
So I don't have.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I don't have my hand up, but I just want to throw out there. So in terms of consultation, I know this is again seismic and Livingston, but it was not anything like you just described. There was like a forced press conference at our school. We had 1 day's notice that it was going to happen. They asked us to speak in favor of it without telling us anything about it. As from the PAC, they asked us to speak favorably for this without even any knowledge on what was going to be announced. And then there was a 24-hour window where they invited the community into our gym to see boards, and there was no consultation. Like, they were telling us, and they basically said to us at that same moment, there's nothing that you can say that is ever going to change what is happening here. Like, they actually said those words. So it's not a consultation as to what that definition would be.
100%. And again, that goes back onto the seismic and the way it's run. It happened to me, and that's why I got involved in DPAC. So it happened to me. I went to an open house, which I thought would be like a normal open house. Here's what we're thinking about doing. What do you think? Give us your ideas. But it wasn't that. It was, here's what we're doing. And when you ask questions, it's like, exactly. It's like, no, this is done. Well, we can change what's inside the building, but we can't change the size or the layout. So it was kind of like surreal, because you're not expecting that. You're expecting a meaningful consultation. But that goes again, that's why that memorandum of understanding and having the public involved early in a more meaningful sense will change things. Paula? You're on mute.
I really appreciate hearing these last two comments, because they're very clear, concrete examples where we've just recently experienced the Board of Trustees saying, yes, thank you very much for your input, and et cetera, et cetera. And it was very diplomatic. And at the same time, what is happening in terms of meaningful consultation with, for example, in our school community, we have a neighborhood that is up in arms with a new school coming on board with a swing school site and a secondary school. And they have major serious concerns. And those concerns have been well tracked. They've written letters to the mayor and council. and lots of communication with the planner, project facilitator, including his manager, and the processes by which consultation occurred is similar to the two examples that were just brought forward. The time frame for the neighborhood to be consulted was in July or in August. The school was supposed to be coming on board in September, but it's got delayed due to construction. So that's a farce. The decision was already made. And now the appeasement is, oh, we'll give the school, the swing site, a 1-year temporary approval. So if that school comes on board in October as a swing site, the old Maple Grove School, they've got a 1-year approval, temporary approval for that swing site only. And then it'll be reviewed. Well, it's going to be reviewed in October, November. And if it's not approved, how are they going to take the students from Maple Grove and move them to another swing site? It doesn't make sense. It's just logically doesn't make sense. So it's like an appeasement. And are we supposed to kind of like not think through that in terms of common sense? So that's around, so from my perspective, the advocacy I'd like to see is procedures for accountability, for meaningful consultation, and procedures that hold the board and hold the staff accountable for. I think it's really, really critical because it's years that I've been watching these superficial consultations where so much work is put into something that is very meaningful, as in the long range facilities plan review and critique that you're doing, and it goes nowhere, or it just goes in little piecemeal, a little bit of influence there, a little bit of influence there, but there is not overall procedures that the board and the staff are held accountable for in terms of meaningful consultation that allows reasonable timeframes.
Because they don't want it. It doesn't actually benefit their agenda.
Exactly.
Let's be clear.
That's my point.
We pushed for this, and we got a procedure put on the books last year, but it's a much weaker procedure than we wanted. There's some good points to it, but it still puts all the decision-making power about how and when consultations happen in the hands of staff.
Correct.
So it's unless the board actually gets their act together and wants that, which is, so that defines an avenue of advocacy right there. Unless the board decides that they want to own that kind of policy, it's never going to happen. And right now you've got a weak board that is fully controlled by the staff.
Yes. Thank you for making that point because it's evident.
Sorry, Gord, are we closing the meeting so we can have a free-for-all, or do you want to keep going?
I will personally leave the meeting in 2 minutes because we're already up to half an hour, but I'm pretty sure the license will allow us to keep it going even when people have left, I think. And I'm sure some of the co-hosts may wish to stick around. I'm not sure, but I've got to do hard stop. Otherwise, there's going to be issues. So I can see Scott's hand. I'll let Vic lead. I'm going to let Vic lead that, but you know, nobody's kicking us out of the VSB building at this point, so it's just on us. So I think it's
10 o'clock. It's too
We
early.
can go on for over 24 hours as long as one of the hosts is willing to be here. I don't think I'm willing to be here that long, but
yes, but I like 1 minute. I'm leaving the meeting. Thank you again, everybody, very much for staying and participating, really, and listening. And with that, I'm going to turn off my video and walk away in 30 seconds.
Well done, Gord. Well done, Vic.
All right, thank you, Scott. Thank you, everyone, for attending this facilities planning meeting. I hope you learned a lot, and let's open it up for general chit chat.